Looking good.
Yeah. They're in the cellar door warming up. Trying to get them fermenting through.
Yeah. Too cold in the winery?
I think it's a seasonal thing as well. Last year, it does help them in here, but last year they just went through in spring really quickly.
Yeah.
It's bizarre. I do believe there's a seasonal thing. So maybe as the days get longer or that kind of seasonal shift happens towards spring.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Sweet. Alrighty, well, I think that does put us live onto both Facebook, YouTube, and our website as well, actually. And we're also live in the Zoom conference chat as well. But if you are just joining us now, first of all, welcome to a somewhat different oak barrel tasting space. This is something that we've been experimenting with for a little while. We've been sort of trialing out, obviously, with the start of that horrible virus, which we don't talk about. We have decided to transition a lot of our in-store wine tastings, masterclasses, all the rest, be it whiskey, wine, spirits, beer, anything like that, to a virtual space. So this is what it looks like now. If you have sort of purchased one of these tasting packs, you'll have the 4 bottles of the wines we're going to taste through tonight, along with a little bit of commentary and a hell of a lot of knowledge. I'm almost certain. If it is your first time sort of tuning into the Oak Barrel thing, my name is Joe Perry. I'm the wine buyer here at the Oak Barrel, responsible for all of the good and bad decisions that are made in the Oak Barrel wine department. Thankfully, tonight was, I could call it a good decision, something that I've been looking forward to for many weeks now. This is by probably one of the most unique and amazing events that we've been lucky enough to run here, by getting our hands on some ultra rare. I didn't even know these existed when they were sort of offered to me. Some older back vintage Ngeringa in with a current vintage. But if you have ever been to an Oak Barrel wine event or tuned in or stepped foot in the store, you'd know how we really strive towards supporting those that do well to our planet. We have passion for organic farming, biodynamic production as well. So you can imagine that my ears kind of pricked up when I heard that we could put this together. It wouldn't happen with just me though. So luckily enough, I have both Erinn Klein, winemaker, master extraordinaire, biodynamic legend of Australia, joining on the chat, and also Connor Sainsbury-Graham, probably the man responsible for making this happen in the first place. So g'day, gents. How are we?
Good. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Just to put Connor in context, he represents our wines in Sydney. So kind of wholesale and a little bit of direct as well. But yeah, really he's our wholesale. He's more than our representative. He's also a good friend. So amazing to work with Connor.
Yeah. Thank you.
He is a lovely bloke. I'll say that much. But yeah, I mean, I rather than I just ramble on and on and on and on about how much I love not only these wines in front of me, but all the wines that I've had from you, Erinn. Tell us about Ngeringa, I guess, and what it sort of means to you today.
All right, so I guess I'll give a quick background to how we got to where we are. So we planted our vineyards in nearly 20 years ago. 2001 was our first year of planting. We planted over 2 years. And we were lucky enough to plant in Mount Barker, Adelaide Hills, on land that had been treated organically, biodynamically so we're on 2 properties, one since the early 80s, or 1980 to be precise, possibly even 79, and the other one since 1988, which is the property I grew up on. So why were they biodynamic? So my parents started a skincare company coming from Germany. They looked all over the world to find a suitable environment for bringing up a family of 4 kids. And the reason they chose South Australia over New Zealand, California, I think southern France was in there with a go as well, was that the Adelaide Hills was relatively unpolluted as far as heavy chemicals and pesticides that were introduced post World War II. So they did soil tests. There was no residual DDT, and these farms that I'm now growing grapes on were used for growing most of the key active ingredient herbs for the skincare range. So also very organic, natural philosophy from inception. In 1985, Juliet started its second reincarnation. Yeah, so my background, I went to university, had to go at commerce, bombed out, couldn't face it. So I went traveling a bit more, kind of discovered wine. And I went back to uni, I guess, to kind of be groomed to I guess eventually take over the family business from my father. But I soon worked out, one, I couldn't work under my father, and also that skincare wasn't really my gig. I kind of stumbled across wine through an ex-girlfriend's father who really exposed me to some pretty cool local wines. Big influence from the Adelaide Hills was Stephen George from Ashton Hills, who's recently kind of semi-retired, but I think he's still involved in the winemaking. But, you know, true legend of the Adelaide Hills, and opponent of our cool climate viticulture, I guess. And yeah, from there the ex-girlfriend's parents said, you hate the marketing, just finish the degree, get the degree under your belt. And I picked up some chem electives in my last semester to show the winemaking faculty that I could actually do science, not just marketing waffle, and enrolled in the 1 year postgrad winemaking degree. And it was the biggest change for me. I've never enjoyed studying, but to study a topic that I was into, probably not that hard to be into studying wine, but it was just amazing. All postgrads, everyone, we had amazing tastings, all learned from each other. It was awesome. And then I kind of went down the industrial winemaking path, straight out of uni, flying winemaking, in charge of hundreds of thousands of litres in big cooperatives in France and Italy and Spain, kind of applying the theory and the kind of the wine chemistry that I'd learnt. And I think I did 3 vintages like that. And it was very soon I just went, why am I doing this shit? I find myself on night shift because I'm obviously somewhat competent in making big decisions, and just totally fell out of love with winemaking. So that was 2000. Yeah, that was 2000 going into 2001. And then very quickly, my dad actually nudged my wife, Janet, and she studied viticulture. We met at uni to plant vineyard here. We did soil surveys. Our soils were pretty suitable for cool climate varieties, and you know, the homoclime was probably more, so the equivalent climate in France was probably slightly closer to the Rhone Valley than Burgundy. So I guess we kind of hedged our bets, planted a fair bit of Shiraz, like nearly 50% Shiraz, and about 20% Pinot, 20% Chardonnay, and then I think there's about 10 other varieties that we're playing with. From that point on, I sought out mentors in Australia and also in Europe. at the complete opposite end of the winery scales that I'd started off. So, I was working in 100,000 ton cooperatives, and literally from there on, I think the biggest I ever stepped foot in was like a 20 to 50 ton winery, which is exactly our scale. Using minimal or no chemicals in the vineyard, much more like not even natural winemaking. That kind of wasn't even on the topic, but much more. I would call it traditional winemaking, where there's generally no inoculation with yeast, not a lot of heavy maceration or extraction of the reds. Everything's just treated more gently, and the wine, you guide the wine through the winemaking process rather than what we're taught at wine school is to control the process. So in some ways, I spent, until we started producing grapes here in 2005, I spent my time researching, some of it hands-on, doing vintages and working with other winemakers, a lot of chatting to other people, visiting vineyards, but kind of unlearning the technical. But probably the real learning is that I would say nearly all the great wines of the world are made in the vineyard and not by the winemaker, which I think is, term winemaker is it's actually a new world concept. Like you go to Germany and France, and it's more the like in German it's Winzer, which is both grower and maker, and in French it's vigneron, so there's not that separation, which I think, I think the use of the language tells us a lot about the way they think about the wine growing, winemaking process. Yeah, and here we are. What are we? Nearly 19 years since planting. There's always some failures in the learning process, and I think the less we intervene in the winemaking, to a degree, part of the learning is making mistakes. But on the whole, I'm pretty happy and proud of most of the wines that we've put to bottle.
It's I mean, even I just had a very, very cheeky little taste test of all of these going in, and I'm very excited to get to know these a little bit better. I guess one of the questions that I'd sort of have at the tip of my tongue would be, now what I'm seeing a bigger rise in winemakers and grape growers and that sort of thing, shifting towards things like organics and biodynamic farming here in Australia. This was something that you were doing 18 years ago, like you said. Have you seen much change in that sort of community or that world? Or
there's a couple of good kind of first-hand stories on that topic. So when we plant, we didn't go into it blind. We definitely researched our climate and the disease pressure, and what we thought was possible. But when we came to plant here, we visited a few. There weren't many organic growers. In one in South Australia. I'm not going to mention names, but and he told us, we're down on the plains, far lower disease pressure. You're in the hills, higher rainfall. He goes, I don't reckon you can do it. And he said the other thing, planting organically, you're going to lose many, many years trying to get vines established without first using herbicide and then converting 1 or 2 years later, which, for some people is fine. To spray on the chemicals, dumb down, kill the soil, and then try and build it up again. But we had at that stage 20 years of organic history. It just wasn't an option. So I guess we did the research. We bought the machines to do it. We went to Europe in 2002 and saw how vineyards are established very successfully organically. So we nutted that one out. But the other irony is that people that helped us put the vineyard posts in and kind of with the labour side helped us plant the very first stage of our vineyard. They were just laughing all the way. It's these young kids have no idea organics is impossible. You need the chemicals to grow grapes in the Adelaide Hills. And, you know, that's 20 years ago. The viticulturist was with Nepenthe at the time. And we also planted very densely. So most of our rows are planted at 1.5 meters wide. So there's no option to get anyone in to contract spray, mow, do anything. So we had to buy our equipment. We were totally set up to be self-sufficient. So I think everyone was waiting for us to fail. But what's really interesting now is bigger companies like Petaluma, Shaw and Smith, they've all kind of seen the light that it's not just the sustainability, but by growing with less external chemical interference, you actually produce better grapes. And you go around the world, you look at the best like so many of the best vineyards in the world, go to Bordeaux, even Bordeaux now, like, which is so conservative. But Bordeaux, Rhone, Rhone, you've had Chapoutier for decades flying the flag of biodynamics. In Burgundy, like you got Loire, you got Lafon, like, and Romani Conti. They don't even need to talk about organic or biodynamic. It's just what you do to grow better grapes, the best possible grapes. And same in you look at what's happening in Tuscany. Nearly all the good producers, in my mind, even if they're not certified, they're well in that direction.
Yeah, it certainly seems like that as well. And I mean, I guess I just selling the wines here in Sydney. It's always been, I don't like it. Sort of, there's always this interesting concept of what is organics, what is biodynamics. Like that, does that mean the wine tastes different? Is there a specific taste that's aligned with organic or biodynamic farming, which obviously isn't the case. But yeah, it just seems like something that's so simple, but isn't.
Joe, maybe there is, and maybe it's not something that you can quantify and say it doesn't, like it's not that the other wine has a chemical taste, but something people consistently say about our wine is, and the descriptors are often a little bit vague, but there's this. Your wines have a freshness or they have an acidity. And like those two red wines, if you look at the technical numbers, they don't have good acidity. Yeah. And when they're young, like, yes, they've got good 10 years of age now. But, people comment on, your wines are alive, they're vibrant, those sort of descriptors. And I'm not, mate, you think I'm making it up, but we get that feedback very often. We're also part of a biodynamic group founded by, it was largely French producers, Nicolas Joly, Barnes Boucher and Alsace, I think Leroy in Burgundy. Who are the others? There's a few other from the Loire that are involved. And we've done these kind of biodynamic feature tastings around the world, trying to give people kind of an international essence that, that hopefully there is a commonality in taste or vibrance or fruit expression or terroir expression coming from grapes that are grown biodynamically, or like in a broader sense, I would say, are grown with respect to terroir.
Yeah, absolutely. I think something that I'm pretty confident we're a myth that we're gonna put to bed very shortly is the fact that, you know, natural wines or wines made in this fashion don't age. And I think that's obviously a lie, and then we're about to taste it. But I guess I'm assuming we start with the 2010 Viognier would be the way to go in this lineup. And just on that, Jolene and Alex have just asked a question in the chat there that says, I've heard that to be certified as organic in Australia, you can still use certain chemicals in your farming. Is this true? If that is true, how does the consumer inform themselves about what chemicals may have been used in the organic products they purchase?
All right, so that's a pretty straightforward one to answer, but you've got to read. So we're certified organic and biodynamic, and maybe I'll go back a step. Like and I get asked this a lot. So what is the difference between organic and biodynamic? And I go, okay, let's go back one stage further. So conventional farming and it's kind of bigger industrial scale farming has evolved to really be heavily dependent on synthetic agrochemicals, be it fertilizers, fungicides, herbicides. I think that covers most of them, insecticides. So, you know, you have a problem, which is, you know, you have an insect attack. Here's this chemical that'll knock the insect out. There is more of an integrated pest management. So, you know, there are softer ways of approaching it, but largely, you know, if I want to generalize, it's kind of a bit of a sledgehammer effect. You have a problem, you spray it, you knock it out. With organic farming, you are still allowed to use certain, and I guess we need to define what we say by chemicals. So I've defined synthetic chemicals that are synthetically manufactured. So under organic and also biodynamic, we are limited to the amount we can use, but we are allowed to use certain forms of, say, copper and sulfur to manage mildew, the two of the bigger disease pressures we face in the vineyard. But they have to be from naturally occurring sources, so they can't be synthetically manufactured. So there's a few forms of copper sulfate that we are not allowed to use, and then there are some that are naturally occurring as mined out of the ground. And then the certifiers also look at the brands we use, that they don't have additives that have a you know, a detrimental effect, or that would then constitute synthetic manufacturing. So yes, they are chemicals. So, you know, every water is a chemical if you want to, you know, break it down. But I guess it's and you can look at the Australian National Organic Standards lists which chemicals or additives are allowed in vineyards for table grape production. In winemaking, we have a list that we're allowed to use. And ideologically for me, I would love not to use copper and sulfur. And we have alternatives to sulfur that we use. We use a lot. We do use a bit of sulfur in the vineyard. Copper for downy mildew, there's no really good alternative in my mind, and we've played with various things. In the winery, our approach is, you know, as little as possible. Anything, and it's the same in the vineyard really, but anything extra you do, I think you're taking something away from the purity of expression of the variety, you know, all the terroir factors, variety, site, season. So you're just dumbing it down. But in organic farming, you're not allowed to use any of the systemic chemicals that go into the sap flow of the vines or the plants. You know, Roundup herbicide it travels into the plant, that just one of the herbicides, and kills the plant that way. So yeah, so you can relatively easy dig up the Australian standards. They're available online through our certifier has them, but anyone can download them. You can read what isn't allowed. And on certification, we have always been certified in the vineyard and the winery. We came out, and a lot of the small bottles you see, we've got the certification on there. It's fairly small on the half bottles. So we did put it on the labels. We took it off for the last 10 years nearly, but it's about to go back on because we are certified. A lot of people say we're as good as certified, so there's kind of this vagary that they want to keep the option of spraying, or they don't want to subscribe to a rigid system. You know, that's their choice. We say we adhere to that standard, and I believe if you cheat, eventually you'll get caught. So I guess it's a black and white measure of integrity. But I feel we go a fair bit beyond the certification standards in our approach to farming.
Yeah, awesome. No, I mean, yeah, it's very impressive. I'm going to jump the gun a little bit there, but just poured a glass of the 2010 Viognier. Wow, what a wine!
Yeah, so I guess unless you tasted some old, and I've only tasted a few older Condrieux, and mostly Viognier doesn't age very well. Like, one of the factors for aging is often acidity, and Viognier is not an acid variety unless you pick it ridiculously early at 11 Beaumet or 11% potential alcohol. But normally, and I think the beauty of the great Viogniers that I've tasted are that they are a bit rounder, a bit more muscly, a bit more voluptuous. Yeah, I think 2010 is possibly, I'm not saying this is our greatest wine, but as a vintage is possibly one of our best vintages of balance. And all the wines have aged very gracefully. So
is that for both whites and reds in 2010?
Yeah. So the Chardonnay is amazing. I think 2010 with age on it is definitely our best Pinot, because it has a maturity and intensity and power, but it also has a really good acid balance too. So I think this is pretty bang on for a 2010 example of a variety that has lower acid anyway. But so what it has lost, and up to 2010, we really did make a Viognier that is picked at good maturity. I wouldn't say really ripe, but I can't remember what the alcohol is, but it's probably a good 13.5%. But when young, it has these really exotic and I think delicious aromatics like musky and kind of more ginger and spice. But I think a lot of those have kind of, maybe they're still in the background. I think I can see them, or maybe I can see what was there. And you really have these kind of much more, I guess, for a white wine, tertiary flavors and complexity, which I think make up for the lack of primary exoticness.
Yeah, I love that. I love that ginger spice note that you just mentioned there. I'm like, I feel like it's just hinting through on the nose of this bottle anyway.
Yeah, it's not over, like some Viogniers, especially the riper ones, can be really sort of over the top dried apricot. I don't think this was ever in that extreme spectrum. It's there. But something I love about Viognier and Northern Rhone whites, also, I guess, kind of some of the whites of Languedoc, is that kind of, I spoke about it earlier, about that slightly oily, slippery palate, which is something you get on wines that have texture and viscosity, with largely due to lower acidity. It's really different experience to, say, a Riesling or even an acid-driven Chardonnay.
Yeah, a lot of comments coming in already through the chat. That people are loving it. Scott actually asks, he says, digging the Viognier, hitting those buttery popcorn and lime citrus notes, which is a great tasting note. And then he asks, how much time in oak does it see? And I'll just piggyback on that. Have you, is your oak regime always the same for these wines, or do you change it up?
So we're just talking the oak regime for the Viognier at this stage, yeah?
Yeah.
So the Viognier, I've always, up to 2000, so we actually changed the winemaking after 2010. I can talk about that in a minute. But the Viognier, we've always, I guess, stylistically, Janet and I fell in love with Condrieu. So I guess we strive for that sort of slightly richer, more viscous style. So, and it has had minimal oak influence. So not new oak. We only ever did a barrel or two of this. But it would have had like 1 or 2 year old oak. So again, looking for a bit of complexity. Obviously, there's more complexity now with more age, but a little bit of oak-derived complexity. Full malolactic fermentation. So again, encouraging that richness and some of those sort of more nutty secondary Malo influences. Full lees contact for 1 year in barrel, just under 1 year, because we would use those barrels again the next vintage. So yeah, 1 year in barrel, small portion of 1 or 2 year old oak.
Yeah, awesome. And obviously, to fit with your ethos and winemaking style, you're never stopping any Malo, are you?
It's quite funny. So the first few years, the Chardonnay we didn't. I think our first Chardonnay was 2007, but our first vintages 5, 6, and 7 of the Chardonnay, we actually blocked Malo because we didn't feel like we had enough natural acidity. But it was such a heavy-handed winemaking approach to add an absolute truckload of sulfur to be sure that Malo wouldn't kick off again. And then you have to sterile filter it. There's no other way around it unless you're happy for it to ferment through in bottle at some point. Because the leftover bacteria, malolactic bacteria, they will eat through the sulfur and eventually will produce lactic acid. So it's a fermentation in bottle. And I didn't like the process of heavy filtering my wine. I don't like it, and never say never, but since then we haven't blocked Malo at all. And the wines for me have this extra dimension, and I guess to me, as long as there's enough balance, be it acid and structure, I think the wine's more complete. Not having that edgy acid, malic acid.
Yeah, I'm loving this Viognier. It's I feel like it's one of those. It's got that personality, that character that you only see from a incredible fruit, but also that time in bottle. Even without it being a particularly acidic variety, I feel like young Viognier is always very tight and very sharp. And seeing it open up like this is pretty amazing. Alan actually asks, Erinn, how would you compare this wine with a white Burgundy? A Chardonnay, it's in that sort of style. So
I guess Chardonnay inherently is Well, so like Viognier is a very tannic variety, which is why they are inherently textural. Whereas Chardonnay, even if you play with a bit of skin contact or are not shy of phenolics, those phenolics are really kind of pricked up by acidity. Because Chardonnay, in my mind, it can almost be an acid, depending on where it's grown and how it's grown. It can be an acid variety like Riesling. Whereas Viognier is a low acid variety, like Marsanne and Roussanne are low acid varieties. If picked properly mature. So texturally, definitely a difference because of the phenolics, the tannins, white wine tannins in the Viognier, and lower acid, and then aromatically Chardonnay. Yeah, it's not as exotic. It's more sort of white stone fruit, citrus, but it doesn't go to those exotic musky notes.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, no, I'm on this. I sort of can almost draw those Chardonnay like comparisons just on how rich and broad this wine is.
Yeah.
So I still think that acid's really holding in there. It doesn't seem like it's going anywhere anytime soon. That's for sure.
Yeah. So I've actually got some kind of aged Rhone Valley whites in blind tastings mixed up with Burgundy. So I was sure that was just like a warmer, richer vintage of Meursault. But it was I think it was a Saint Joseph white, which from memory is Roussanne, isn't it?
Yeah, Roussanne, Marsanne, and Saint Joseph. But also, I suppose Meursault known for a little bit more new oak than the Northern Rhone.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see these varieties kind of head in that direction without the use of your 35% new oak.
Yeah. Well, that guys like Yves Clairon, they can throw a bit of new oak in. Gaillard and yeah.
I mean, now's about the time when I'd ask the Zoom chat and the guys following on Facebook what they think, but everyone has already chimed in and said that it's delicious. So,
Erinn, what was the thinking behind Viognier in the Adelaide Hills? Because it's not a very common varietal up where you are, is it?
I guess at the time, like when we planted, and it was kind of pushed by Yalumba a bit and Brian Crozer, but I mentioned that climate thing, like so our if you tried to place our climate in up the Rhone Valley or anywhere in France, it's very similar to Northern Rhone. Okay. So Côte-Rôtie, Condrieu, almost temperature-wise identical. And then also our soil is very high silica schist for this vineyard. It's from our Loom vineyard, where we also have our top Syrah. So I guess there's kind of soil similarities, but also it was a fair bet that Viognier would do really well in this climate.
Yeah.
Which I believe it. If it has soils that have high enough mineral content that can be transported into the grapes, I think it makes really interesting wine. So that's on the Yalumba vineyard. We also had 8 rows planted on the Summit vineyard where our Pinot and Chardonnay are grown, and it made okay wine, but it never had the same level of expression. So we always did it in a sort of second tier Chardonnay Viognier blend, and we recently put a new road to the winery straight through the vineyard where the Viognier was. We kept the best of Viognier because I personally I love Viognier.
Yeah.
But it's commercially it's not an easy variety.
Yeah.
So I guess it's I have a very soft spot for it, and I will keep making it.
Well, the 15 and 16s were both cracking that I've had.
Yeah.
So for anybody watching, drink more Viognier.
Yeah, from the hill.
from the hills, yeah.
Well, there's probably not much around. It's probably a rarity now. There's not a lot around anymore.
Yeah.
I think Petaluma still. I don't even know. Do Petaluma still make the Viognier, Adelaide Hills Viognier?
Maybe.
So their original vineyard is it's within half a kilometre of our vineyard. So I guess we were riding a little bit off Brian Croze's research as well. And these schistty soils are very particular to this part of the Adelaide Hills.
Yeah, I'd love to see more. I've been drinking stacks of the Yeringberg Viognier actually out of the Yarra. Thoroughly enjoying that as well. But we did another tasting on Tuesday night, which was just all talking Rhone Valley whites. I think Marsanne, Roussanne, Viognier, and even things like Grenache have such a way to go in Australia, and might actually be our best kept secret at the moment. Who knows?
Yeah, I think honestly, like our best ones here, I don't know, Pinot and Chardonnay are very popular, and I think we give them a really good crack. But I still think long term, with the probability of climate change, we do need to possibly, like, if we're going to focus on French varieties, probably focus a little bit further down the Rhone Valley.
Absolutely. Rosé, I guess, a bit of a trip into the future. It's just coming through on the Zoom chat. Alan asks, how long would you sell the 2016 Viognier for? And then also David says, we will buy it. Please keep making it. It needs to be stocked somewhere. We can't find it in Sydney. David, you and I are going to have a very lovely chat shortly. And I will give you the name of an excellent bottle store in the Sydney CBD, just down from Museum Station.
Terrible parking.
Terrible parking, yeah. And the ugly staff as well. I can't.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it before we went live. So since 2016, the Viognier has become a really significant, even in small quantity, a significant part in our Pet Nat blend, specifically for aromatics and texture. And 2011 to 2016, I actually changed the winemaking approach and really kind of went more skin contact on the Viognier. So it changed it, like it texturally, and it kind of has more tannin, but also has that sort of, I describe it as a sort of saline sea air character you get quite commonly from skin contact in whites. But the ageability, and for me, the appeal of the wine is amazing when young, but something happens to those phenolics, and the wines, for me, aromatically completely fall over. Like the 2013 for me is completely dead. 11 has amazing acidity because it's such a cold year, so it still has interest and appeal. But I think these kind of more classic Viogniers that inspired me from the Condrieu are more probably what I will continue to pursue.
So I guess natural progression says that we taste the rosé now, the 17 actually. So almost the outlier in tonight's lineup being much more youthful. What went into this?
So this is our rosé, probably made in a very similar way to our that Viognier actually, and our Chardonnay for that matter. So it's nearly all whole bunch pressed. It's about 95% Syrah, fermented and matured in old oak barrels. And I think what's relatively unique to this rosé is that it does full malolactic that's matured on full fermentation lees for the best part of a year. No sulfur is added, just a tiny dose just before bottling. So that really gives you that sort of onion skin, salmon color. Whereas if you protect from oxidation with sulfur, CO2, which we do none of pre-fermentation, and even post-fermentation, the only protection we do is topping barrels. You do tend to go more towards that sort of, I don't know, it's almost I think onion skin's a good, brown's not fair, but I think onion skin's a good color descriptor. So what happens is, to keep a wine pink and purple, they are anthocyanins, so color molecules that come from the skin, mostly the skins of grapes. We have to protect them from oxidation, so protect them from oxygen. So this one actually tells a big story of how we make our wine, which I would refer to as kind of traditional winemaking. Like if you go back 50 or even 80 or 100 years, people didn't have tanks of CO2 or nitrogen to inject on top of juice or tanks or fermenters or barrels. So it was oxidation was a natural process in the wine pre-fermentation. And then post-fermentation, you top the barrels and you limit the amount of oxidation so the wine doesn't go the next stage, which if you really let it go oxidative, it'll turn to vinegar. Yeah. So
I really love that onion skin descriptor. I think I'm going to use that quite a lot.
Sorry, I need to top up. Yeah, and so 2007, like being an totally open book, 2017, colder vintage. It's for me, it just needed a little bit more texture and structure. So it actually got a small, I think it was around 5%, without actually checking my records. It got 5% whole bunch Pinot in it, which was relatively light in color. So I didn't do it to adjust color. It just needed a little bit of extra depth and complexity.
And so with this being 95% Syrah, how was the Syrah from the same vintage that you made? Straight through.
Amazing. So Syrah 17 was, I think, for grape growers that were in the Adelaide Hills that weren't totally onto their game, was a really high risk game for disease. So powdery mildew was a big problem, downy mildew. We had a few big rain events. And I actually distinctly remember, I think was that the last year of rootstock?
17. Yeah.
But that year we had this massive rain event coming on the Saturday, and I was due to fly to Sydney on the Friday before rootstock, and I actually changed my flight, flew in Saturday lunchtime because I just saw the mildew event coming, and I sprayed copper. And we don't spray copper. Most growers spray copper every 10 days to 2 weeks, just as a preventative in case it rains. I guess that's the luxury of being small. We only put it out when we think there's a good chance of an infection in the vineyard. But I changed my flight, and I know a lot of the other Adelaide Hills guys weren't there to control the issue in the vineyard. And I heard a lot of stories of mildew because of that one rain event. So, wow. So that said, we didn't have a disease issue. It was cool and wet, but then it turned into a relatively long, warm Indian summer. So we had moderately, I would say, good yields, not high yields. And it was a beautiful, long, drawn-out ripening process, which meant we had good acidity, we had good technical term, phenological ripeness. So tannin, it's when you have sugar, tannin, and flavor kind of line up at an optimum level. Optimum being totally subjective, really. Depends what you're chasing. But yeah, 17, amazing year. The Syrah is actually, for a cooler year, actually it surprises me how ripe the flavors are for Adelaide Hills in a cooler year. I think it's close to 14% alcohol, which is really getting up there for the style that I would like to chase. Pinot has this amazing kind of tension and drive. So I think the 17 wines are pretty unique. Yeah.
I'm currently drinking the 2017 Illuma.
You are?
Yeah, I'm currently drinking the 2017 Illuma right now. So it's absolutely stonking one.
It's quite plush, isn't it?
Very, yeah, but incredibly detailed wine.
So yeah, are there any comments or questions about the rosé?
Not that I've seen come through yet, but obviously anyone that is following along on Zoom, feel free to just throw your thoughts into the Zoom chat there on the rosé. I think everyone's still a little bit stunned from how good that Viognier was, and this rosé is just going down an absolute treat as well. Yeah. But for me, it's selling a lot of rosé through the summer months and stuff like that. I'm really enjoying seeing this. This kind of movement, I guess, in Australian producers trying to not make Provence rosé. I guess it's like there's that style, that really sort of light, soft, pink fruited, a little bit of watermelon, a little bit of grapefruit thing. I really like rosé like this, that has a bit of personality, has a bit of grunt. It's got that depth and complexity that makes, Syrah drinkers or serious red wine drinkers, sort of stand up and go, oh, okay, this is rosé that isn't $12 sort of thing.
Yeah.
I've always described it as a rosé for Chardonnay drinkers.
Yep.
It's got depth, it's got complexity, it's designed for food, rather than these Provence styles that are coming out, which is, sitting at Watson's Bay, with all your mates. And this is actually something where you can sit around and have it over a meal or move it into, a set course at a restaurant, that sort of thing. So
pretty versatile, food versatile as well. Like you can almost throw, probably wouldn't be the ideal match, but you could, at a pinch, you could have it with some red meat.
Yeah.
Because it does have a bit of texture and depth. Yeah. For me, the thing with the rosé is, like, for a lot of them are just kind of tutti fruity flavors, which is, I think, what you were getting at, Joe. Whereas this really has some kind of deeper flavors, like some complexity.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we see I do drink a lot of Provence rosé when the time comes, and definitely get stuck in that way. But I know it upsets me a little bit when you see producers here in Australia that go and actively chase that style, which I find is really light and really hands off and really smashable, and that's cool and all. But yeah, hats off to you, Erinn, for making a rosé that's got that depth and complexity and makes you think a little bit more. Sweet. The one bottle that I have noticed that is slightly taller than all of the rest of them is that the next one we're going to taste.
The rosé bottle. With the
Pinot bottle.
209 for a different style bottle. And I think the Viognier was into the newer bottle as well. Yeah.
So the Syrah and the Viognier are similar size, but the Pinot, I guess we'll probably jump into. So yeah, for everyone following along, this is the 2009 Pinot Noir. We'll just taste now.
Cool. So we have 3 distinct vineyard sites. I've talked about the Illuma, where the Viognier and Syrah are from. Illuma because the soil is quite illuminated by the micaceous schist, which is fool's gold. So fake gold. It's silica, not gold. And the Pinot Noir and Chardonnay come from our Summit vineyard. We also have a bit of Syrah planted on that vineyard. But it's east. I think the key there is it's east facing. The Illuma's west facing, so much warmer. East facing gets the morning sun, and by angle of incidence of the sun in the morning, it's cool. But in the afternoon, when the sun's coming from the west, it's shining down the vineyard, so you have far less heat hitting the vines, hitting the berries. So relatively speaking, even on hotter days, there's less heat in that vineyard. So much more suited to Pinot and Chardonnay. Especially during the final ripening period, especially Pinot Noir hates that extreme heat. So, and the 2 sites behave completely differently. Also different soil. So the Summit vineyard, because it faces Mount Barker Summit, doesn't have any. It has nearly none of that schist. It's more a sandstone. Topsoil is a lighter, sandy, very friable sandy loam, and then the subsoil is clay and sandstone. So for me, what makes the Pinot is not the minerality of the rock, the schist, it's the clay and the iron in the subsoil. So you get those kind of earthy, slightly kind of ferrous characters. Yeah. So 2009, relatively warm year. Our vines, it was a 4th year of production from these vines, so still relatively young vines. And like if I'm honest about this wine, I'm pleasantly surprised that it has aged pretty damn well.
Especially
even in
young vines.
Even in half bottles, like I think under screw cap the half bottle isn't as big a deal as under cork. But yeah, it's held up.
You've always done screw cap on your wines, Erinn?
Always until 2016 single vineyard Syrah. Yeah. So with the top wines, we are in the process of changing over to high quality natural cork.
And what inspired that decision?
I don't know. Like technically, I think the screw cap is as good as you'll get. Environmentally, the screw cap is definitely doesn't tick all the boxes. And like, given we kind of grow naturally, make wine naturally, like I like the idea. I've always liked the idea of having the wine in contact with a natural medium. But when we released our wines, or when we looked at bottling our first wines in the early 2000s, the cork industry just totally had their head in the sand. They were in total denial of the cork taint issues. Mm-hmm. And like Janet and I were just crazily drinking, tasting, probably more European than Australian wines. But we know, like for us, I reckon it was 10% cork affected wine that we tasted. And like for me, that wasn't acceptable. And then to be told by the cork suppliers, oh no, like it's well under 1%. You know, that my first-hand experience was way higher than that. And it wasn't from a sample of 10 bottles. Like that was, you know, other than investing time and money setting up a vineyard and winery, we were seriously tasting some interesting booze at the time.
Yeah, I mean, just on that, we actually had our first sort of Q&A question from Michael, and he asks, where is the cork sourced from?
So I'm working Well, it's Portugal, through Amarim, one of the bigger cork suppliers, and they actually give us a guarantee on cork taint. So if we open a bottle or any of our customers open a bottle, we need to get that bottle back. The cork company will reimburse us the cost of shipping the bottle with a cork back, and they'll replace it at full retail value.
Wow.
So they've got money in the game. It's not cheap though. You're effectively paying for an insurance policy. And I've seen one really badly corked wine since we bottled 2 years ago under cork. So
yeah, I again, this Pinot is really blown me away as well. It's really lively. It really plays into that. I guess it's sort of typical of the hills, but there's a little bit more forest floors, a little more mushroom, darker plum, and that kind of thing going through it. But for 11 years old now, it's still bursting out of the glass.
and it's kind of got these, like for me, these really kind of interesting, almost tarry, earthy characters.
Yeah, I got that. Yeah.
So one thing we see, even being like, and I use the term relative cool climate because some years that are just not that cool. One thing, even in cooler years like 17, we still have an insane amount of sunshine, and I think that always said, and we probably shouldn't compare ourselves to when we're looking at Pinot and Chardonnay to Burgundy too much, but it will always set us apart is that, that sunshine in the glass, that fruit intensity, that in this Pinot is still showing through after 11 years. Yeah. So we do have that sort of, describe it as fruit intensity, fruit sweetness, like it's there. And in our winemaking, it's something that we don't overly go out of our way to preserve. Like we really try and push the winemaking more kind of in a savory secondary direction by using some stems in the Pinot, by aging on lees, by giving the Pinot a full year in barrel. Like there's using a bit of oak for more savory complexity. We use oak from Coopers and Forests that tend to have more savory complementary characters rather than kind of sweet vanilla. Definitely no room for American oak, which adds sweetness to the wine, which I think we have enough of in Australian wine. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. I like it. Yeah, it's so vibrant, so youthful. A couple of comments that came through. One, Scott says, after 11 years, the Pinot still shows some youthful, bright fruit flavors. Was this a particularly solid vintage or some witchcraft?
No witchcraft that I know of.
Biodynamics.
Yeah.
Yeah, not a lot of dancing around in the nude on the full moon.
I thought that's what it was.
Not particularly in that year. Like 2009 is a surprisingly solid year. So even the Chardonnay, and the Chardonnay is still holding up amazingly well. So our Chardonnay won a gong in Canada where it was put up against, who is it? The Chamber of Commerce, I think, in Montreal. Do this, I don't know if they still do it, ran the Chardonnay tasting of top old world producers versus new world. And I think Vas Felix Hardsbury was in the top 10, ours was in the top 10, Bindi was in the top 10. I think maybe Utana as well, but like that was pretty pretty cool. So, and we've still got a few bottles every time we open it. It's like, yeah, 2009 is probably one of our classic years. Yeah.
So yeah, lots of witchcraft, basically.
Yeah. So probably on like on the witchcraft side, I don't think it's witchcraft. I think the whole chemical wine growing and making is witchcraft to me. But something we never did, and we saw amazing quality and kind of, not in all the wines, but like our first vintage Syrah 2005, the single vineyard, there was this amazing vibrance and intensity in the fruit. Yes, it was young vine, it didn't have the depth, but the wines are still drinking good from 2005. So we never pushed the vines with fertilizer, definitely not chemical, but also like you can get natural fertilizer. You can get cow manure or chicken manure, get the vines to grow really quickly, get them up on the wire, get them, producing a full crop after 5 years. But we never pushed the vines. So we kind of let them grow gently and slowly after, I think it was 3 years in the Shiraz, 4 years in the Pinot. We got our first crop, and tiny, absolutely, I think we had 3 barrels of Shiraz in 2005. I remember correctly. It may have been 5 off 3 hectares, so it's absolutely nothing. But the quality was it surprised us, but it also surprised our the critics. I think, not that I rest on the points too much, but I think that 2000, someone will fact check this, I'm sure. But I think our 2000 first release Syrah got 94, 95 points with Halliday. So, and I think young vines can produce amazing grapes as long as they're not pushed for quantity. And if you treat them with respect, as you would hopefully your children, I think you can really have a good outcome in the early years.
Yeah, I'm thoroughly enjoying this. So Claire actually asks, how much longer could we cellar the Pinot for? This one in particular. I've got some ideas, but what would you think of that, Erinn?
Well, I think that because we don't have that many left, but we did have quite a few of the half bottles, so we have visited this one quite frequently, and I don't think it's dipping in a hurry, so I'd be quite comfortable to say another 5 years. But at the same time, it hasn't got a fast trajectory, so maybe even 10. But yeah, I always say, like, if a wine is drinking well, drinking great, like, don't cellar it and then be disappointed.
Yeah, I like sort of what you touched on earlier tonight as well, about speaking about some of the top estates that either that work organically or biodynamically, like your Romani Contis, your Loires, your Chapoutiers, and that sort of thing. And a lot of their wines, whilst not necessarily being, I guess, made to be these age-worthy monsters, they still hang in there and they still almost improve after 30, 40 years. And I assume that that's down to some concept of the farming and the winemaking. But yeah, I think that there's a lot to gain in aging wines made in this fashion.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are I think we're so, and I think it's something that's happened in Australia, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing. From a producer's point of view, it's a great thing that people are getting into crunchy, young, juicy wines. But we don't tend to drink, unless you cellar it yourself, we don't tend to drink mature or aged wines, even with 5 or 10 years, or often let alone 2 years.
Yeah, 2 or 3 years.
There's a lot of my peers in the hills, they're getting ready to bottle their 2020 vintage.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, all you have to do is look at somewhere like, the Hunter Valley, where, you know, like pretty much anything that comes out of the Hunter Valley is not designed to be drunk within at least 10 or 15 years, but it's always marketed as a drink now wine, and it's
So something, Jana, and I guess it's something we picked up from old world wine producers, is that, you know, you try and release the wines when you feel they're drinkable and approachable. Maybe, you know, often to release them at their peak is just not realistic.
Yeah.
Because, you know, every time we change our single vineyard Chardonnay vintages, I just think, you know, the one that we've just run out of or stopped selling is just hitting some straps, and then the new one is still a bit tight and edgy, even though it's 2 years in bottle. So, you know, I guess we're trying to release our wines when there's a bit more drinkability. Yeah.
I would say it's incredibly hard to sell wine to people that they can't drink.
Yeah, I've got to just duck off. My battery's critically low. I've got to get the charger for my computer.
There's a few more questions coming through the Zoom chat as well. Obviously, we love all the questions that are coming through as well. But just on this Pinot especially, I mean, you know, like the Viognier, like the Pinot that we're drinking now, I feel like these are flavors that don't come out of young wine. That sounds kind of stupid to say out loud, but there's nothing quite like this that I'm seeing, you know, in its youth. That's for sure. Connor, I don't know if you have a similar view or not, but yeah.
No, I'll definitely like characters that you do find 100% in these in older wines, and for me, it's just it really just proves the point of why I've built a cellar and why I'm not drinking my wines all right now. But I think as well as when you do drink some of Erinn's, you know, newer release stuff as well, is that really realizing that there is the ageability there too, which, you know, I think's really, really interesting. The fact that Erinn does have, you know, like a good cellar of his wine, so that he can look back on them year after year as well, and really just see that development. It's really, really something quite special.
It's also something that we learned from as well. Vintages like 09 I've tasted quite frequently. Other vintages, we just needed the money and we sold it down to own, and then we still keep 2 or 3 dozen of every wine we think has potential to age, so we can follow it. So, and to our mailing list, we occasionally do vertical tastings, and then we offer the vintages that are tasting good that we have a little bit of stock of as well. So that's pretty interesting for people who like to drink wines with a bit of maturity.
Jolene and Alex asked in the Zoom chat there, speaking of good years or vintages, have you experienced lower yields this year as a result of the drought, etc.? Does this mean that 2020 could be a really good year for the grapes that survived the drought and bushfires?
All right. So yes, it was. So we've had 2 really low yielding years. So 2019 was as low as this year, partially due to being a drought year as well, but also we got hammered by frost and also hail around flowering, so that was pretty detrimental. This year it was definitely more drought related, and then also we had a heat wave, like crazy heat day, windy heat day right at the end of flowering. So I think we lost a lot of our yields then. Yeah. So we do irrigate our vineyards. I think if we didn't irrigate, we would end up making quite kind of raisiny, jammy wines. I think if we were really purist, we wouldn't irrigate, and you'd say it is what it is. But for me, those are stressed characters, and I think you lose freshness and expression when your grapes start raisening. So my approach to irrigation is to manage and mitigate vine stress, but we don't irrigate for quantity, which obviously we didn't achieve this year if we only had a 50% yield. But we do try to mitigate vine stress. I think that's that's another thing where that sunshine in the glass, that really inky, juicy fruit, you get that fruit concentration. But I think once the wines go in that direction, there's also a degree of sameness and a loss of expression. Yeah,
that's interesting. Yeah, I've just bought a glass of this 2009 Syrah to sort of, I guess, round out the lineup there. But yeah, just we keep getting drawn back to that Rhone theme, I guess. And to me, this is Hermitage-esque in that black fruit and olive tapenade and cracked pepper, that sort of thing. Awesome.
So again, being cool climate doesn't mean, or relative cool climate, especially 2009, I think climatically was a warmer than average year. But you don't have a lot of that kind of peppery spice, but it's and it's definitely not a green spice that you get Shiraz. You use a lot of whole bunch, and you really accentuate that green spice, which can almost be minty, which I think is actually kind of almost an underripe characteristic of Shiraz, a bit like that tomato leaf capsicum is an underripeness for Cabernet. And then in Sauv Blanc, they're these varieties that have these pyrazine characters, which are really, for me, distinct markers of not correct maturity or proper maturity.
So it's quite common in Cabernet Franc from the Loire Valley, I've found as well.
Yeah, but it's a little bit. I find that Cabernet Francs, it's a little bit. It's not as aggressive as Cabernet Sauvignon. It's not as kind of leafy minty. It's more earth. Tends to be more earthy, unless it's really green. But I think if the old and you see it time and time again, and some of those great Loire Cab Francs from Chinon, or when they're in good years, when they're mature, just amazing wines, and they're grown probably right on the cut on that kind of knife edge where you can just get it right in good years. It's the same in Tuscany. Some of the vineyards I've worked in Tuscany, when the Sangiovese is just right and it's properly mature, that's when it sings its best.
Yep.
Whereas hot years like 2003, where it's ripe bordering on overripe, still good wines, but they're not the wines with the most intrigue or complexity or tension. But
Scott actually asks quite a cool question here in the chat that says, Adelaide Hills is often at the forefront for innovation and exceptional modern wines in Australia. Is the region going from strength to strength, or are there some dangers and pitfalls?
Oh, that could be a loaded question, that one. Well, go back 30 years. Who was there 30 years ago? There was Brian Crozer, who was definitely an innovator and visionary and leader in the wine industry. And he's still still making amazing wines now. Stephen George from Ashton Hills.
Mhm.
He was one of the first to plant vineyards, I think, in 1978. So what's that? It's nearly 40. It's 40 years, isn't it? So, I guess he had similar things happen in the Yarra Valley as well. But I guess like the whole natural wine thing, and I think that's where this question is leading, definitely had a kind of big bang moment. Oh, when was it? It was, I guess, in the late noughties. And we've never set out to make natural wine. We've set out to grow naturally and to make the wines with minimal intervention. But I've never really considered myself a natural winemaker, and I have a few reservations around the concept of natural wine. There's this kind of romance that natural wine, the winemaker kind of does nothing and the wine makes itself, and then we bottle it and people love it. But I think if we're kind of a bit more honest about it, if that was the process, we'd all be making vinegar, because that is where any juice that you ferment would end up going, right? That's when the juice is stable, when it's gone through alcoholic fermentation, does malolactic, and then you got acetobacter converting it to vinegar, and then you might have all sorts of other characters. So I think to be a good natural winemaker, like you've got to guide those processes to bottle and stop that last part of the equation of turning to vinegar, but also manage other pitfalls and potential faults in the wine. Like we've had wines that have been complete failures that we haven't bottled. I've bottled some under other labels and regretted it because I wasn't happy with the wine. So I've definitely had my learning failures, and it's not all smooth sailing because you give up a bit of control to the bacteria and the yeast that you have in the winery. But we've had some, and as a winemaker, like when we first saw it in our wines, we had some Brettanomyces in some of our really early wines, and I grappled with it, and I think I found a way to manage it by just running a really clean ship in the winery. I get winemakers every year. We have winemakers from France or Germany or Italy, and they think I'm totally mad how I clean everything 3 times before I let juice or grapes or wine come in contact with it. But that's my way of managing Brettanomyces. I'm not particularly sensitive to mousiness, but I don't think we've ever had a mousy wine. So that's kind of the German coming through in me. That it must be clean, otherwise clean it again. I think it's the way it has to be. And there's parallels to a good friend of mine who's coming down here in a few weeks to release new wines. You see him in the kitchen, and our kitchen here at the winery that staff use, and he's just appalled at the level of hygiene. For him to make good food, like that's kind of the first step. He comes in and scrubs the kitchen, and while he's here cooking for us or the public, like that's the way it has to be. And it's the way it has to, I think, to make wines that are clean and expressive. That's the way it has to be. Otherwise, you either make faulty wines or you have to intervene with lots of sulfur or filtration or reverse osmosis and all that stuff is defeating the good that we're trying to do in the vineyard. Anyway, that's enough of a rave.
But like, I'm actually really happy that you mentioned that as well, Erinn. Due to like, obviously, I try to travel around a bit when I can and visit different wine regions and wineries and talk to the winemakers themselves. And the one thing that really hit home to me earlier this year in January, just doing a little bit of vintage work, was all of the, I guess, natural or minimal intervention or whatever that is, all of the sort of those sorts of wineries I went to were so much cleaner than the conventional wineries. And you know, I noticed that these guys that were making these minimal intervention wines or you know, low preservative or however you want to label it, they were so much more tedious about what was going on in the winery than the larger, more, I guess, conventional winemakers that were pumping out millions and millions of liters in Australia. That was quite, you know, that really sort of struck a chord with me more so.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting and really refreshing to hear. And that brings me back to, like, I don't know if it's 100% his quote, but, you know, Gareth Belton from Gentlefolk and I are pretty good mates. And, you know, this thing that, you know, anyone can just make natural wine and, you know, they're amazing. I think it's a misnomer, because to be a good natural winemaker that, you know, can actually, like, they don't do nothing. They almost have to be more thoughtful and more considerate of the process and probably be smarter and be able to preempt and read and taste things before they actually go wrong. You know, like, it's not a birthright. It's a skill and a level of sensitivity and intelligence and foresight, I think. To do it well and do it consistently well. I think that's the challenge, to do it consistently well.
That's pretty funny. Like, Gareth is the first person that comes to my mind when I sort of spoke on that about just being meticulous about everything. And, you know, some of the massively produced conventional wines we see today, God only knows what's going on behind a lot of those containers and stuff like that, right?
Yeah. Oh, mate, I've worked at some of the best of those wineries. You know, I've made I'm not going to say I've made wine. I've made red wine out of white grapes, where, you know, the only grape ingredient was sultana juice. You know, and it just blew my mind that you can and would make wine like that.
It's scary. It really is. Yeah. I'll just address a few questions that have come through the little Q&A here. Michael asks, how many liters of the Syrah 2009 were produced? He loved it and he wants a full bottle.
I think we
Claire also asks. Sorry.
I think we still have a few full bottles. How much was made? It wasn't a massive year. I would say of the order of 1,500 bottles.
Wow.
Yeah. So what's that in liters? 1,400 bottles. 1,350. Yeah. Liters. And that would include the halves that we bottled. And so most years of the single vineyards, we will bottle. So it's a section of the vineyard, but then it's also a barrel selection. So the vineyards the barrels that don't show the best, they will get declassified into our second label wine. So that probably should be noted. All the wines today are under the top label. So, and then there are changes at hand. We're about to release a revamped single vineyard label. So the wines and the philosophy is stable. It's the same, but we just come up with a new label that we hope reflects a little bit more what we're about. So a little bit more the place, kind of the earthy and the sustainability approach that we have to growing and making wine.
It just pervades the message a little bit more clearly.
Our original labels, my wife Janet did nearly all the design work on our original labels. That we really kind of, I guess they were kind of much more classical, conservative, old world approach, a little bit of new worldish theme in there. And then the second label, it's kind of had probably more progression and changes over the years. It was the JE, Janet and Erinn. So Janet is now not so involved in the business. She's pursuing other interests and studies at university, doing an honours in environmental stuff, funny enough. And so the JE label kind of lost its relevance a bit, and we're kind of more playing on the Ngeringa theme and the meaning of Ngeringa. So no screenshots, anyone? All right. So that's the new second label. I think the camera is bad enough that you can't really see it properly anyway, but that's a she oak. So Ngeringa can you see it?
Yeah, I think so.
That's the she oak branch, the she oak nut. Ngeringa being Aboriginal, meaning place of she oak. Yeah. And then the she oak, actually, the branch we had kind of mimics the Mount Barker summit as well, which is kind of our biggest topographical feature here.
So that answers, David's just asked questions, said, where did the Ngeringa name come from? But I think you just touched on that there about the tree.
Aboriginal and the Paramount, our local clan's language, meaning place of she oak.
Yeah.
And the she oak.
And Michael also asked any magnums.
So most of the single vineyard wines going forward, we bottle a small quantity of magnums. Starting with the 2017 single vineyard Syrah, which Connor has the 750s in Sydney. We do have a few magnums of that. But going forward, we're going to bottle a small quantity of the best vintages of magnums. And the Pet Nat. Pet Nat comes in big as well.
Oh. So that there behind you, Erinn, that's a riddling rack, is that correct?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
That's where.
So I'm in our cellar door here, and our cellar door is by appointment only, so that I don't have to deal with the masses. I'm not very good at that. You can confirm that. You can confirm that too, Connor, can't you?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Quite honestly.
Anyway, so I put quite a few dozen in the cellar door, which I can warm up to try and to make sure that come springtime we hopefully have some Pet Nat that has some bubbles, because at the moment it's so cold in the cellar that it's not fermenting in a hurry. So hopefully we can encourage these to go through. Yeah. So have we talked about the single vineyard Syrah?
I think we touched on the vintage, that's for sure. Yeah. But otherwise, I have just been smashing it because it is delicious.
Yeah. So both Pinot and Chardonnay, most years, especially mature years like 2009 would have been, have a little bit of whole bunch, but it's kind of to be like seasoning rather than to make a distinct, big print on the wine. I just want it to get a little bit of those sappy tannins, some of that kind of subtle herbal spiciness from the stalks. And more so when the wine is young, you get these really beautifully kind of confected, juby, lifted fruit characters from the whole berries that are carbonically fermenting at the bottom of the fermenters. So that Syrah is fermented, I think it's about 3, like the standard is around 3 weeks on skins, very gentle extraction, so not a load of heavy pump overs, just gentle maceration, mainly with the hands. Pressed straight into barrel, 2 years in barrel. Sometimes we have a bit of reduction, so I might rack it once, but only on a as needs basis. But 18 months to 2 years in barrel, 20 to 30% new oak. Pinot is generally around 20. Yeah.
That's
and
awesome.
Then minimum a year before we release it in bottle.
I'm thoroughly enjoying this. I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts in the Zoom chat as well on the 09 Syrah as well, because I hate to sound like a broken record, but I mean we just don't see wine like this released every day. But yeah, special. Graham actually chimes in and says, "What is Pet Nav or whatever Erinn was saying about getting sparkling?"
Over to you, Joe.
Well, so pet nut's this thing that these natural wine guys have invented. They made it up in the Adelaide Hills. Basically, it's pet nut, to my understanding, is the most or method ancestral, as they call it, the original version of sparkling wine, which basically involves bottling your wine or your fermenting grape juice before all of the sugar has finished fermenting out of it. And then one of the byproducts of fermentation is carbon dioxide, which basically allows, if you bottle the wine while it's still fermenting, you will get a portion of carbon dioxide that ferments through but stays in the bottle. So in one sense, it kind of spritzes itself based off the alcoholic conversion of sugar to alcohol inside the bottle where there is no oxygen escape. How'd I do?
I've got a scorecard, but it would be a 10.
That's it, right? That's it,
yeah. A natural form of sparkling wine.
A natural form of sparkling wine, yeah.
Yeah.
So you're not adding yeast or sugar in order to get carbonation.
Or carbonating still wine.
Carbonated still wine, yeah. And then
I quickly ducked out. It's often referred to as the ancestral method as well. I don't know if you mentioned that.
I didn't do a very good job of it, but yeah.
Yeah.
Graham Mill says, "What does it mean to drinking?" It's essentially it's not, you're not looking at as intense as a prosecco or a champagne, but it is a slightly spritzy version of a base wine. Yep. I guess.
And some of them explode when you open them as well.
Yeah. So what is that? Is that just like the amount of residual sugar that's left in the bottle before you can bottle it?
It's a combination of too much sugar.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the home brewer goes, I want to make a stronger beer. I'm going to charge it with double the sugar dosage, and all the bottles explode. But it's also because you're bottling it with the yeast from primary fermentation. If you have too much yeast, too many solids, the combination of that and the bubbles, it just gushes out of the bottle.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same if you have a champagne that's warm or not fridge temperature, it has the same effect.
Yeah.
We've never really had that issue with yours though, Erinn, have we?
No, I'm pretty particular about how much sugar I bottle it with. But
Are you just scorching your pet nut, Erinn?
I haven't done, but
Yeah.
oh my God, like this year I've had two, I'm not sleepless nights, but I do wake up in the middle of the night going.
That's the German in you again, isn't
No,
it?
no, it's like, so normally I bottle it at, I've been bought, like, you probably remember the wines, Connor, like 2018 I bottled with, I think, 10 grams residual sugar, which is, so champagne is bottled with roughly 18 grams.
Yeah.
So it's almost half of the bubbles of champagne. But that one didn't have a lot of bubble.
Oh, it was really pretty and light though.
Yeah, it was a much lighter year. 2019, I think we bottled with 12 and it fermented dry and it was spot on. This year I bottled it with nearly 15. And the sugar level in tank just wasn't going down. And because it's not fermenting, it's not producing CO2 in tank. So I didn't want it to oxidize anymore. I just put it in bottle on Monday. So.
All right. Hopefully there's not too much mess to clean up tomorrow.
It won't be tomorrow, but the consequence for me, if it does end up fully fermenting through, then, and it doesn't have a stupid amount of solids, but like if it has too many solids and too much CO2, I will have to disgorge it.
Yeah. And Graham, it sounds like you and my father have the same ginger beer recipe, mate. Yeah, it was a very interesting morning waking up to the sound of explosions in the garage.
Yeah, more is not always better.
Yeah.
When it comes to bottle fermentation.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any kind of questions on biodynamics or why we do what we do, how we do? Sort of.
I'll definitely give people a bit of time to throw that into the Zoom chat there if they are following along. What I might do really quickly is though just pull us off Facebook and YouTube, just to kind of, I don't know, end official proceedings, if you will, and then super happy to answer any questions via Zoom and chill. I guess I don't know.
I guess from my point of view, and one of the reasons that I love working with Ngeringa